The first time I met Cheryl, she was standing at the edge of my driveway with a measuring tape and a clipboard like she was about to survey a crime scene. She had that exact haircut you're picturing, blonde, stiff, and angled like it could slice drywall. "You've got exactly 2 feet of hedging over the setback line," she said, scribbling something down. "That's a violation of HOA Code 7.4.3. "My property doesn't fall under the HOA, I said, calmly sipping my coffee. "I own it." "All of it?" She snorted like that was the funniest thing she'd heard all year. "Not possible. Everyone in this neighborhood falls under the Evergreen Pines HOA. You can't just make up exemptions." I didn't bother arguing. Not yet. I just pointed at the brass plaque on my brick mailbox. It read, "Property of Owen Vexler, private land, established 1988. She looked harder, then scoffed. "That's not legally binding. It came with the deeds," I replied. "You folks are squatting on land I own." That was the spark. Over the next few days, things escalated. Cheryl, who proudly introduced herself as HOA chairwoman Cheryl Bannister, started mailing me fines. Not just for the hedges. For having a truck in my driveway, for not having approved exterior paint, even for putting up a basketball hoop for my nephew. She didn't care that I'd never signed a covenant, never agreed to join their little dictatorship. They didn't own anything. I did. And I had the deeds to prove it. My grandfather had bought up the original tract before any HOA existed. When he passed, the land came to me, lot lines, mineral rights, and all. The HOA had been built on top of it in the 90s, but somehow no one realized the association never held title to the ground under their own feet. That changed when Cheryl tried to annex my land officially. She called a mandatory emergency HOA vote, which, again, meant nothing to me, and stood in front of the clubhouse with her clipboard army. "We're voting to bring Mr. Vexler's property under HOA management," she announced, smiling like she was doing charity work. "Unanimous vote wins." I walked up and dropped a thick envelope of certified documents on the folding table. "You can't vote to take land you don't own." Cheryl didn't even open the envelope. "This isn't a discussion, Mr. Vexler. You'll be getting the paperwork soon." The next day, I got a notice from the HOA attorney, some guy named Mark with a fake-sounding last name, claiming they were seizing my property due to non-compliance with community standards. It was laughable, but it wasn't just paperwork anymore. They sent a landscaping crew to tear up my hedges. They stapled violation notices to my front door. They even tried to shut off my water, which I paid for directly through the city. I wasn't laughing anymore, so I decided to end it. All of it. I went down to the county recorder's office, pulled every deed, plat map, and property line record from the last 50 years, and made 50 copies. I highlighted every square foot I owned, including the land under the HOA's clubhouse, pool, and tennis courts. Then I invited the local news. The news van rolled up just after sunrise. A cameraman stepped out, adjusting his lens while the reporter, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy blazer, pulled her mic from the bag. Her name was Dana Cross, and she had a reputation for gutting local corruption like a surgeon. "You're the guy who owns the whole neighborhood?" she asked as I handed her a binder full of county-certified documents. "Every inch under their feet," I said. "And they've been trying to seize my land like it's monopoly money." She flipped through the pages, pausing at the survey plats and notarized transfers. "You've got every title going back to '88. This isn't just solid, it's bulletproof." We set up in front of the HOA's clubhouse. I didn't bother knocking. I just stood on the steps, faced the camera, and said, "Evergreen Pines HOA has been illegally occupying land they don't own. I've got the paperwork. They've got a clipboard." Dana's crew broadcast the story that evening. By the next morning, my street was swarming with more cameras, cars, and city officials than I'd ever seen. The county zoning director showed up in person with a folder of his own and a look that said he hadn't slept since the segment aired. "Mr. Vexler," he said, offering his hand, "we've reviewed the filings. Your claim is accurate, but there's more." He opened his folder and pulled out a scanned map, zooming in on a shaded zone. The HOA's clubhouse, tennis courts, and pool, they were built without a valid permit. At the time, the developers assumed the association had acquired the land. They didn't. I nodded slowly. So they've been operating an illegal structure on private property for over 2 decades, he exhaled. It's worse. They've been charging dues and using those funds to maintain structures technically trespassing on your land. That's when the detective showed up. Detective Avery Sloan, plainclothes, no nonsense. She looked around at the gathering crowd, then at the clubhouse door. We received a report about unauthorized construction and illegal utility use. Also, she paused, some forged documents were submitted to the city claiming a transfer of land rights. I raised an eyebrow. Forged, she nodded. Filed under your name. Someone tried to make it look like you signed away the property 2 months ago, but the signature doesn't match anything in the county's records. The notary listed doesn't exist. I didn't need 3 guesses to know who was behind it. And sure enough, Cheryl came storming out of the clubhouse, flanked by 2 board members. Her face was red, her heels clicked like gunshots on the pavement. You can't do this, she snapped at the detective. This is a private HOA matter. Avery didn't flinch. Ma'am, you're operating on land you don't own, using utilities not registered to your organization, and you've submitted falsified documents to a government office. That's not a private matter. That's criminal. Cheryl tried to pivot. This man is obstructing community operations. He's been violating code after code. There are no codes for land you don't control, I cut in. You've been fining me for things you have no jurisdiction over. Dana's camera was still rolling. That's when Cheryl made a mistake. She turned to Avery and said, "We've been managing this neighborhood for 20 years. You think we're just going to roll over because this guy dug up a few old papers?" Avery smiled, but it was the cold kind. "You're going to come with me." You can explain that attitude to a judge. One of the board members tried to intervene, but the other hung back, suddenly very interested in a crack in the sidewalk. Cheryl was handcuffed and placed into the unmarked car, still yelling about bylaws and community charters. Over the next week, the House of Cards collapsed. The city launched a full audit of the HOA's finances. Turns out, Cheryl had been funneling repair contracts through her cousin's construction firm at double the market rate, roads that were supposed to be repaved last year. The funds had been rerouted into administrative expenses. The tennis courts, paid for with fines issued to homeowners for things like non-regulation bird feeders. Residents were furious. Especially when they learned that the HOA's legal threats had been backed by an unlicensed attorney, Mark, whose law firm turned out to be a rented mailbox and a fake website with stock photos of people in suits. I held a meeting in the community park also on my land, though no one realized it until I pointed out the boundary markers. About 40 neighbors showed up, many clutching their own copies of violation letters and fee invoices. A woman named Carla spoke first. "I had to pay nearly $1,200 last year because my fence was too beige. I didn't even know that was a rule. Cheryl said it was in the handbook." "There is no handbook," I said, holding up the only official HOA filing ever recorded, a single-page incorporation document unsigned. Another man, Brian, a retired firefighter, stepped forward. "They threatened to lien my house over a garden gnome, said it disrupted aesthetic cohesion." That got laughs, but they were bitter. I laid out a plan. "I'm not here to run a dictatorship, I'm here to stop one. I have no interest in controlling your yards, your fences, or your paint color, but we need to shut this HOA down legally." We formed a temporary neighborhood committee. I brought in a real attorney this time, someone with municipal law experience. Over the next 2 weeks, we filed a motion with the city to dissolve the Evergreen Pines HOA for fraud, misrepresentation, and illegal operation. The evidence was overwhelming. Then came the final nail. Detective Sloan returned with a search warrant. They raided the clubhouse, and found a locked filing cabinet full of falsified signatures, backdated notices, and unauthorized bank withdrawals. Cheryl had been paying herself a monthly consulting fee of $3,000 for over 5 years. The homeowner votes were unanimous. Every one of them agreed. The HOA had to go. At the dissolution hearing, Cheryl's attorney didn't even show. She was already facing charges for forgery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft by deception. The judge signed the order within 10 minutes. Later that evening, I walked the perimeter of the now empty clubhouse. The lights were off. The sign had been taken down. The tennis courts were locked. The pool sat still, untouched. A few neighbors passed by. One of them, a mechanic named Jules, gave me a nod. "You saved this place, man." I shook my head. "No, I just reminded everyone who actually owned it," he grinned. "Yeah, you, the best part. With the HOA gone, the neighborhood voted to convert the clubhouse into a real community center open to everyone. No fees, no fines. Just people helping each other out, and me. I finally got to trim my hedges the way I liked. I didn't expect the knock at 6:41 a.m. on a Tuesday. When I opened the door, 2 men in tailored suits stood on my porch, one holding a leather portfolio, the other with a badge clipped to his belt. The taller one introduced himself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Reuben Calloway. The other was Special Agent Trevor Haynes with the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. "We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding documents recovered from the Evergreen Pines HOA clubhouse," Agent Haynes said as he adjusted his jacket. "Permission to come in." I led them to the den, where I kept every copy of the land surveys, deed history, and legal filings. Calloway wasted no time. He opened his folder right on my coffee table and slid over a photocopy of a cashier's check. "You recognize this?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "That's a payment Cheryl Bannister made to Garrison Development Group. I saw it in the audit reports." Calloway tapped the date. "This was issued 3 months ago, but according to Garrison's corporate filings, they dissolved 6 years back. The check was deposited anyway into an account registered to a shell company based in Delaware." Agent Haynes added, "That shell company is linked to a man named Felix Drummond." "Former city planner?" I leaned back, piecing it together. So Cheryl wasn't just mismanaging HOA funds, she was laundering them. Calloway nodded. "More than that, she was using the HOA as a front to funnel money into fake development projects." When we searched the clubhouse, we found invoices for zoning surveys, utility mapping, even environmental impact assessments, all billed to Garrison, all fake. Based on your land filings, these were for parcels she had no legal right to develop. I handed him a folder of my own. "I've got documented proof she tried to annex my property. She even filed a forged land transfer under my name." Agent Haynes flipped through the pages. "We confirmed that. The notary listed on the forged documents died in 2012. Cheryl submitted them digitally, hoping no one would cross-reference the notary log." Calloway closed his folder. "We're bringing federal charges, wire fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and obstruction, but we need your testimony. You're the only landowner who never submitted to the HOA, and your documentation is airtight." I agreed. They left with copies of everything plus surveillance footage from my security cameras that showed Cheryl and 2 board members removing files from the clubhouse after their legal counsel went silent. That footage, combined with timestamps from the forged documents, was more than enough to trigger the next phase. By Friday, subpoenas had been issued to 9 current and former HOA board members. A city finance officer was arrested for accepting bribes to misplace zoning records. And Cheryl. She was extradited from an out-of-state spa retreat in Arizona where she'd been hiding under her maiden name. The local courthouse couldn't handle the case alone. It was transferred to the state's attorney general's office, where it exploded into a full-blown corruption scandal. The press labeled it the Evergreen Scheme. It made statewide news. Dana Cross interviewed me again this time while standing in front of the now boarded-up clubhouse, which had been declared a crime scene. Mr. Vexler, she began, how does it feel knowing your refusal to sign HOA paperwork exposed a statewide fraud ring? I kept my answer simple. All I did was protect what was mine. The rest unraveled because people stopped looking the other way. That night, as I filed my official deposition, I got a call from a woman named Veronica Ellis. She introduced herself as an attorney representing a group of homeowners from 2 counties over. Their HOA had the same consultant listed on their financial reports Garrison Development Group. They pulled the same scam here, she said. But no one had the land leverage you did. We'd like to meet. I agreed. She and 3 homeowners drove out the next afternoon. We sat at my kitchen table, where I showed them how I'd traced the chain of ownership back through the county archives and overlaid the surveys with zoning overlays most people didn't bother to request. Veronica took notes. You realize what you did proving ownership in a way that preempts HOA jurisdiction that could become a model for fighting back. I'm not looking to be famous, I said, just wanted them off my property. But you did more than that, she said, flipping through her notebook. You exposed a network of fraudulent HOAs laundering money through fake developers. That's organized crime. A week later, I was invited to a closed-door meeting with the state's special prosecutor. The task force had expanded. They'd traced fraudulent filings in over 6 counties, all tied to the same pattern fake companies, forged permits and HOA boards that were either complicit or too afraid to speak out. The prosecutor, a man named Keenan Rourke, said something that stuck with me. HOAs were supposed to protect communities. Somewhere along the way, they became tools for control and, in this case, tools for theft. He offered me an advisory role, not formal but enough to help other homeowners in similar situations. I declined the title, but I agreed to consult when needed. I wasn't about to become a bureaucrat, not after watching what unchecked power could do to a neighborhood. Back home, things changed fast. The homeowners who'd once feared fines now organized block parties. A neighbor I barely knew, a nurse named Rena, started a community garden in the space behind the tennis courts. No one asked for permission. They just helped. The clubhouse was eventually turned over to the county as part of a restitution deal. Cheryl's assets were seized, including a vacation home in Florida and a rental property she'd bought using HOA funds. Those properties were liquidated to repay over 200 residents who'd been fined illegally or extorted into paying for phantom services. Detective Sloan stopped by one evening, off-duty this time. She brought a 6-pack and sat on the porch with me while the sun dipped behind the rooftops. You know what the wildest thing is, she said. We've investigated organized crime rings with cleaner books than that HOA. I raised my bottle. All it took was a clipboard and a fake developer, she laughed. And one guy with a deed no one bothered to read. We sat in silence for a while, quiet but not heavy, just calm. Later that week, I got a letter from the state. The charges against Cheryl and the others were moving forward. The trial date was set. But more importantly, a new bill had been introduced in the legislature, one requiring all HOAs to register with the state, disclose their financials annually, and verify that they had legal jurisdiction over the properties they claimed to manage. They called it the Vexler Act. I didn't care much for the name, but I liked what it meant. One morning, as I was trimming the edge of the lawn, Jules, the retired mechanic, walked by with his grandson. He pointed at me and said something I couldn't hear, but the kid waved like I was some kind of celebrity. I waved back, then went right back to my hedges. No fines, no clipboard, just quiet, and I planned to keep it that way. The courtroom was cooler than I expected. Not cold, just clinical, the kind of chill that seeped into your thoughts and made everything feel sharper. Rows of reporters lined the back pews, their notepads ready, eyes locked on the prosecution table. The judge, A lean man with silver hair and a voice like a wood planer adjusted his glasses and gave the room a look that said he didn't tolerate theater. Cheryl Bannister sat stiffly between her attorneys, face drawn and pale. Gone was the woman who once waved violation slips like royal decrees. Her perfectly tailored blazer couldn't hide the tremor in her left hand. She didn't look at me once. Case number 4967A, the clerk announced. The People versus Cheryl Ann Bannister and Associates, charges including conspiracy to defraud, forgery, obstruction of justice, and unlawful use of public authority. The prosecution wasted no time. They opened with a series of projected documents, financial statements, forged signatures, email chains between Cheryl and her cousin's shell company. One message, recovered from a laptop seized during the clubhouse search, read, "We'll amend the deed filings after the vote." He'll never see it coming. The jury didn't flinch. They followed every slide, every date, every dollar. When it was my turn to testify, I stepped up to the witness stand, straightened the cuffs of my shirt, and met the eyes of all 12 jurors. They looked like regular folks. One wore a truck stop windbreaker. Another had a pink highlighter tucked behind her ear. The kind of people who'd seen enough of the world to recognize when someone was lying to their face. The prosecutor, a woman named Marla Dorsey with a voice like flint, asked me to walk through the ownership chain, the forged documents. And the moment I realized the HOA's actions weren't just overreach, they were part of something orchestrated. "Mr. Vexler," she said, her tone even, "in your opinion, what was the purpose of the Evergreen Pines HOA's attempt to bring your land under their control? To gain legal leverage over property they couldn't otherwise develop," I said. "They needed control on paper so they could move ahead with construction permits tied to fake projects. My land was the last holdout. It was the only gap in their foundation. How did you confirm this?" I explained how I'd traced the flow of funds, how Cheryl had moved HOA dues into an unregistered LLC, and then used those funds to purchase a tract of land adjacent to mine under a different name. That land was later sold to a contractor for 10 times the purchase price, despite no work ever being done on it. The contractor, a ghost company, the buyer, her sister-in-law, the money, gone. The defense tried to challenge my credibility, but they had nothing. The documents were dated, notarized, and independently verified by the county. The signatures Cheryl had forged were laughable once held against my driver's license from the DMV. One even had my name misspelled. After 3 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just under 6 hours. The verdict, guilty on all counts. Cheryl's sentencing hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later. She faced up to 20 years. Her attorney requested house arrest. The judge, without blinking, denied it, but the story didn't end there. During the investigation, evidence led to a deeper rot. The HOA's treasurer, a man named Paul Hennings, had been quietly siphoning funds to a private account in the Caymans. He'd already fled the state by the time the charges were filed. The FBI tracked him to a marina in Belize, where he was detained trying to board a fishing boat under a false passport. He was brought back in cuffs. His charges included wire fraud, tax evasion, and financial conspiracy. His arrest opened yet another door. Turns out, several other HOAs across the state had been using the same consulting firm, Garrison Development Group. The firm, registered to a post office box and staffed by no one, had submitted zoning applications for dozens of neighborhoods, all under fraudulent land claims. Cheryl had just been the most arrogant. The governor announced a statewide task force to audit every HOA with more than 50 members. Over 24 boards resigned in a single month. 3 resigned mid-meeting. Meanwhile, back in Evergreen Pines, the community kept moving forward. The temporary committee we'd formed transitioned into a neighborhood council, not a governing body, just volunteers who organized events, kept residents informed, and made sure no one ever wielded unchecked power again. I stepped back from the spotlight. I never wanted a role or a title. I stayed in touch with the state auditor's office, provided feedback when asked. But mostly, I planted peppers in the garden behind my shed and fixed up the porch swing my grandfather built himself. One afternoon, as I was replacing a cracked board by the curb, a battered Jeep pulled up. A woman with a clipboard leaned out the window. She wore a real estate badge and a warm smile. "Excuse me," she said, "I've got a client looking at a property down the road. Do you mind if I ask, is there still an HOA here?" I stood, wiped my hands on my jeans, and pointed to the empty post where the HOA sign used to hang. "There was," I said, "but it collapsed under the weight of its own lies." She laughed, not unkindly. "That's a first. My client will love that." Later that week, I was invited to speak at a university seminar on property rights. I declined. Not because I wasn't honored, but because I'd already said everything that mattered. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to be left alone to enjoy the land my grandfather bought fair and square and never have to defend it again. That spring, the neighborhood council held their first garden fair. Kids painted flower pots, someone grilled sausages, and a retired teacher gave away tomato seedlings from her own greenhouse. A banner hung across the park gate, "Community without control." I stood near the back, sipping iced tea, watching people laugh without checking over their shoulders. No one measured hedges. No one wrote citations. No one voted on paint swatches. As the sun set, a breeze rustled through the maple trees planted along the main road. The same road Cheryl once tried to rename after herself. Now it had no name, just a purpose. And that was more than enough.